Hey, you know who knows who a first cousin once removed is? Google. You know who else knows? No one, because it's terribly confusing. You know what else is confusing? Trying to deal with who's related to who and how they all fit together, not just now, but a couple thousand years ago. And that is the unfortunate task that we're up against when we try to understand who all these people are, who all have the same name, which is Herod, in the books of Luke and of Acts. So since they keep coming up in both of these series we're doing, I thought I'd just make one super short video and try to explain the whole thing once and for all. To understand the Herod thing and why they matter at all, you got to understand the political situation with Rome that made the Herod thing even possible. For the first time ever, you have a Roman Empire. Before the time of Caesar Augustus, it was a Roman republic, and it wasn't quite as expansive. But the empire, well, it has empire in the name. It's big. And empires govern over a whole bunch of different kinds of people groups that aren't like the people from Rome. And the Jews are one of these people groups, and so the Roman leaders, specifically Caesar Augustus, feels like he needs to go get somebody who will represent his interests and be, vaguely Jewish. Enter the Herod family. So the first Herod to come up in the Bible, who is sort of the head of this whole family tree, is Herod the Great. Wasn't born with that name, probably gave it to himself. And he's a guy who struck a deal with Augustus to govern over the Jewish people, even though he himself wasn't Jewish. He's from Idumea, which is like a historical cousin to the Jewish people. They never liked that about him, and they never liked that about his descendants. That is, that they weren't legitimately Jewish. On top of that, the guy had a penchant for violence that never went away, and the older he got, the crazier he got about this stuff. Herod the Great is most famous for being the Herod who ordered the execution of all the babies about the time that Jesus was born because he felt threatened by the prediction that there would be a king of the Jews who was about to be born. He tried to curry favor with his subjects by building big, gigantic things that he thought would be popular, like a rebuilt temple and some fortress, palace stuff that's still around and really elaborate and cool. But the problem is people get really grouchy when you tax them at ridiculous rates to build things that you told them they were going to have built for their own pleasure and enjoyment that they never got to access. And the steaming turd cherry on top of his entire reign was at the very end of his life, he ordered all of his henchmen to execute a whole bunch of people so that someone would actually be sad when he died. Fortunately, they didn't follow through on that order. So Herod died around 4 BC, right about the time Jesus was born. If those dates are confusing, we can talk about the dates of Jesus' birth another time. But he had 3 sons who I want to talk about: Philip, Archelaus, and Antipas. These guys ruled over different parts of Judea in 4 separate chunks, and so sometimes they're called tetrarchs. Like tetras, because like 4. You see what the okay, you got it. Herod Philip ruled from the time of his father's death up till 34 AD, so just a little bit after the death and resurrection of Jesus. He was responsible for the territory up north around Galilee. Some people liked him. A lot of people thought it was weird that he married his niece. And he built some really cool stuff in Caesarea, which you can still go and check out if you feel like going to Israel. Herod Archelaus rules from the time of his father's death until 6 AD, and he's in charge of the heartland of Judea around Jerusalem, and Joseph decides not to go back to that part of the world because he doesn't trust Archelaus and thinks he might follow through on his dad's weird designs on his newborn kid. Herod Antipas is the son of Herod the Great who comes up the most in the biblical narrative. He is the guy who had John the Baptist executed. He is the guy who threatened to kill Jesus, and when Jesus heard about that, he replied by saying, "Go tell that fox I'm going to do whatever God wants me to do here, and it's going to be a bunch of good stuff." And that doesn't seem like much of an insult in modern English, but the original language has that word fox being presented in the feminine form, so just let that one sink in. Jesus was briefly on trial before Antipas at the end of his life. Antipas wanted him to do miracles or magic or something. Jesus wasn't game. Antipas got bored and sent him on to Pilate. Eventually, in 39 AD, Antipas was forcibly deposed and retired/was exiled in modern-day France. Herod the Great's grandson, Herod Agrippa I, had connections in Rome, was buddies with an emperor, parlayed that into the opportunity to be the client king of Palestine from 37 AD to 44 AD, which put him in a position to mess with the early church. And he did by having James arrested and executed. Then he was going to do the same thing to Peter, but Peter miraculously got let out of jail, and then shortly after that, he got eaten by worms by giving a speech and died spectacularly. The last Herod of note is Herod Agrippa II, who has a brief interaction with Paul, famously quipping, "Hey buddy, you're almost convincing me to become a Christian. Paraphrase is mine." After that, the Herodian line doesn't matter much because just a few years later, in 70 AD, the Romans come and crush the Jewish resistance, and that's the end of Herodian government, or really any Jewish government in Israel for a really long time. In sum, the Herod family comes up 50 plus times in the New Testament, so understanding where these guys fit is going to be really helpful for you understanding the story of Jesus and the early church. So, hopefully this was useful. In the meantime, I'm Matt Whitman. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour. We'll see you soon. Now this might seem like a lot to take in, but when I was a kid, my grandma had a song that she would always sing to us at night to help us remember which Herod was which. It went like this. Oh, to remember which ones all the Herods are, all you have to do is remember this simple rhyme. There's Herod the Great, who murdered all those babies, and then there's no song. I thought I could pull that off.